Jamal Carter was 13 years old, skinny, bespectacled, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that carried both the innocence of youth and the fire of someone who had always been underestimated, someone used to the smirks, the eye rolls, the dismissive tones, and the world's quiet assumption that a kid like him couldn't possibly be exceptional. And yet Jamal had spent most of his childhood doing something no one expected, while the boys in his neighborhood in Brooklyn played ball in the cracked courts or chased each other through the project stairwells. Jamal sat cross-legged on the floor of the community library, devouring every book he could find on science, medicine, anatomy, biology, and physics, his mind soaking up knowledge like a sponge while his mother, Maria Carter, a nurse who worked long shifts at a clinic, encouraged him despite neighbors laughing that she was wasting money on books instead of sneakers, and though his father had left years ago, Jamal filled that empty space with words, diagrams, and the thrilling puzzle of the human body, memorizing the names of bones and the functions of organs until he could recite them in his sleep, and by the time he was 13, his notebooks were filled with diagrams of circulatory systems, emergency procedures, and even the steps of CPR, knowledge that he knew might never matter, until one night on an airplane, when everything changed. That night began like any other journey, with Jamal and his mother boarding a red-eye flight from New York to London, Maria having saved for months for this trip, a chance to see Jamal's aunt and to give her son the gift of traveling beyond their familiar borough, and as they shuffled down the aisle with their carry-ons, Jamal already clutching his thick paperback medical encyclopedia, he felt the weight of stares from strangers, the kind of quick glances that said, "Why is that kid bringing a textbook on a plane?" And when they found their seats, cramped together in the middle row between a scowling businessman and a family of tourists, Jamal smiled nervously but received only a sigh of irritation from the man in the suit who muttered something about hoping this kid doesn't cry the whole flight, which made Jamal's mother bristle but remain quiet, squeezing her son's hand as if to say, "Don't let them get to you." The flight lifted off, engines roaring, New York shrinking beneath a blanket of glittering lights, and soon the cabin dimmed as passengers settled into the monotony of an overnight journey, attendants moving up and down with trays of drinks, parents soothing crying babies, businessmen opening laptops, and Jamal, already absorbed in the section of his book that described cardiac arrest symptoms, highlighted with his pencil as he whispered under his breath terms like ventricular fibrillation, arrhythmia, myocardial infarction, his voice drowned by the hum of engines but still enough to earn a chuckle from the businessman beside him who said, "Kid, you actually understand that stuff, or are you just trying to look smart?" Jamal didn't answer. He had learned long ago that explanations only invited more mockery, but his mother answered for him, calm but firm, "My boy reads because he loves to learn." That's more than most adults can say, earning only an eye roll from the man in the suit. Hours passed. The plane cut through turbulence, trays rattled, people shifted in their seats, and Jamal drifted between pages of medical diagrams and the muffled music from his headphones. Then it happened, the sound of a scream, sharp and piercing, shattering the calm. Jamal's head snapped up, heart pounding, as he saw 2 rows ahead an elderly man slump sideways in his seat, his wife shaking him desperately, shouting, "Henry! Henry, wake up!" While attendants rushed forward, passengers craning their necks in panic, whispers turning into chaos. "Is there a doctor on board?" The flight attendant called over the intercom, voice tight with urgency, and almost instantly a tall, confident man in a tailored gray suit stood up, holding up a hand like a savior stepping into the light, announcing, "I'm a doctor," his voice commanding and steady, immediately drawing sighs of relief from nervous passengers, and he pushed past Jamal and others to kneel beside the old man, who now lay stretched in the aisle, his chest barely rising. The so-called doctor barked for water, demanded oxygen, muttered something about dehydration, and for most of the passengers, that explanation seemed enough. They nodded, murmured relief that a professional was in control, but Jamal's sharp eyes, trained from hours of study, caught something the man either missed or ignored. The bluish tint forming around the old man's lips, the irregular, gasping breaths, the way his hands curled unnaturally as his jugular vein throbbed, signs Jamal had memorized, signs that screamed this isn't dehydration, this is cardiac distress, and Jamal's stomach twisted in frustration. He tugged on his mother's sleeve, whispering urgently, "He's wrong. He's not dehydrated. His airway's blocked, he needs CPR and the defibrillator, not water, but his mother looked at him, torn between pride in his knowledge and fear of drawing attention. Still, Jamal couldn't stay silent. He leaned forward, voice trembling but determined, telling a flight attendant, "You need to tilt his head back, loosen his tie, get the AED, he's in cardiac arrest, not dehydrated." But the attendant, overwhelmed, glanced at the doctor, who frowned and waved his hand dismissively, saying, "Stay out of the way, kid, you'll confuse people," his tone dripping with condescension that drew a few chuckles from nervous passengers, and someone muttered, "What does a 13-year-old know compared to a doctor?" The words burned Jamal's chest, but he didn't back down, his voice louder now, urgent, insistent, "If you give him water, he'll choke. Look, his chest isn't moving, he needs help now." The wife of the man, tears streaming, clutched Jamal's sleeve, desperate enough to listen to anyone, crying, "Please, what do we do?" And for a split second, the entire cabin's attention swung toward the boy they had ignored, the boy with the book. Jamal, shaking but focused, knelt beside the unconscious man, gently tilted his head back, loosened his shirt collar, and opened the airway, just as he had read countless times, and immediately the man gasped faintly, a flicker of breath returning, enough to hush the mocking whispers. "Now the defibrillator," Jamal ordered, his voice suddenly steady with authority that belied his age, and the attendant, startled but obeying, rushed to fetch the AED, fumbling with the device until Jamal guided her through the steps. "Place the pads here and here, listen to the voice prompts," his words calm, precise, echoing the training manuals he had memorized. The machine analyzed, beeped, and announced, "Shock advised," making passengers flinch, and Jamal shouted, "Clear," stepping back as the attendants pressed the button, sending a jolt through the man's chest, his body jerking before collapsing back. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, a cough. A violent, raspy cough as the old man's eyes fluttered open, his wife sobbing in relief, throwing her arms around him, and the cabin erupted in gasps, whispers, applause. Jamal, chest heaving, sat back as adrenaline surged through his veins, and in that moment, every dismissive look, every smirk, every doubt melted under the weight of truth. A 13-year-old black kid had just saved a man's life mid-flight. The arrogant doctor, face pale, muttered something about good instincts before retreating to his seat, humiliated, and the passengers who had chuckled earlier now stared at Jamal in awe, some clapping, some reaching out to pat his shoulder, while the captain himself emerged briefly from the cockpit to shake Jamal's hand, calling him a hero. The businessman beside him, the same one who had rolled his eyes hours earlier, stammered, "Kid, I misjudged you," but Jamal didn't answer, simply opened his book again, though this time when he read, no one dared to laugh. His mother, tears streaming, kissed his forehead and whispered, "You just showed them all, baby, you're destined for greatness," and Jamal, though still trembling, felt something deep shift inside him, the weight of years of being ignored, dismissed, overlooked suddenly lifted, because now he knew the truth. Knowledge, courage, and determination could cut through prejudice like lightning in a storm, and as the plane soared across the dark Atlantic sky, every passenger aboard would forever remember the night they ignored a 13-year-old black kid, until he outsmarted a doctor and saved a life before their very eyes.